So I'm presenting this today on behalf of the NAC team, everyone you see here, as well as others who are working hard on this in collaboration with our 3 ADRC sites. And I'm excited to share an update on our work on the COVID-19 supplement. So as everyone here knows, right, COVID has been an especially challenging time for Alzheimer's patients. The Alzheimer's Association reports that there's been a 16% increase in dementia-related deaths during this time. And of course, we're nearly 3 years into the pandemic at this point, and an increasing number of research studies are demonstrating biological connections between COVID and ADRD. So COVID is unique, right, in causing these neuropsychiatric symptoms. And one of the most common symptoms of long COVID is brain fog or cognitive sequelae. The mechanisms underlying COVID symptoms are really poorly understood, which has limited our ability to predict susceptibility and prognosis, and to effectively design and test therapeutics, which of course is the ultimate goal. So we wanted to build a platform to help uncover the relationship between COVID and ADRD. We're interested in many questions, as you'll see at the end, especially as we talk through some of those, which were brainstormed with our whole group, including a lot of input from Carlos, who's on the call today, but including whether COVID might increase the incidence of ADRD and or lead to a steeper symptomatic decline. So we have been building a platform. We are in collaboration with our 3 ADRC partners, which include Washington University, Indiana, and Columbia. And really the goal of this platform is to collect and link EHR and claims data with genetic data and phenotypic data from NAC for consented ADRC participants. And so I want to walk through this figure. I know many of you have seen this before, but to talk about the different pieces here. So we launched the version 2 of the COVID form, which was approved by the Clinical Task Force, governing body for the ADRC program. Last July, it was launched to all 37 ADRCs. They are in the process of collecting this data on patients, which is wonderful. We are pulling that data in. You'll see from my next figures how much data we've received to date from V1 and pending information coming on V2. So that data is actively being collected. In addition, we are developing an EHR spec to be able to pull electronic health record data from these 3 ADRC partner sites. So all of that data is coming to NAC and getting integrated with our longitudinal clinical data, this incredibly rich neurocognitive data that we've always collected here at NAC, in addition to our neuropathological data. In addition to that, we are going to be sending data to the secure enclave at MEDRIC to be able to combine this with claims data as well. Additionally, we are looking at being able to bring in the genetic data from NIGADs. I'll talk about that a little bit more later in the different approaches that we're considering for how to do that in collaboration with Lisan and his team. Those discussions are actively underway right now. But I want to share also that additional power here will really come from not only combining the data streams that I outlined here as part of this platform, but NAC is actively working right now to bring in a number of additional data streams over this current award cycle that we're a part of, which will add even more power to this platform and the kinds of questions that we're able to ask and hopefully answer. So that includes digital biomarker data that we're going to be pulling in, digital neuropathology, more EHR, I hope, as well as really linking in metadata from partners like SCAN, NICRAD, and NIGADs. So I also wanted to mention that this is also happening at a time where at NAC we're undergoing a dramatic amount of modernization. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that, because this is going to impact how we are able to use the data for this platform and for that we're building, as well as an impact on future studies we might want to do. So essentially, we are modernizing our submission interface. Many of this is going to be going through REDCap. All of the data is going to be stored in our Amazon Web Cloud, AWS Cloud, and all of that data is going to be organized by the Flywheel platform. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But essentially what that's going to enable us to do is to be able to integrate all those different data streams that I mentioned to you, connect them to NAC IDs, And that includes data that we're collecting directly at NAC, as well as metadata that we're going to be pulling in from, as I mentioned, partner organizations like SCAN, NICRAD, and NIGADS. And we want all of that data. We're building a platform called the Data Front Door that's going to make all of that data searchable and accessible to researchers anywhere. So a little bit more about Flywheel. So this is a new partner at NAC. We're actually launching the Flywheel platform at NAC this month after having done a big pilot with them over the course of 6 weeks. And this is going to be really transformative for NAC. So essentially what's behind our ability to be able to ingest all sorts of additional new data streams, to integrate those data streams, connect them to NAC IDs. And then we're actually going to be connecting a tool called Leaf, which was developed at University of Washington Research IT, to Flywheel. That's going to enable us to do cohort selection in a very granular way for all sorts of different kinds of studies. So I just wanted to share that context in terms of some of the modernization that's happening at NAC, because it's relevant to what we're trying to do. So back to our supplement here, just to refresh our memory, what we're trying to do. So our aims here are to, one, support study design, recruitment, enrollment at 3 pilot sites and collect baseline data. Our second aim is to demonstrate integration of EHR and CMS data with phenotypic and previously collected genetic data. Our third aim is to facilitate computational analysis of genetic information with participant, phenotypic, and genetic data. And once again, here are our partners for this initiative. So I want to walk through some of the progress that has happened on this supplement as of late, kind of what is the current status on these things. So I'll start with governance. And as everyone here knows, right, this is both, there's governance infrastructure and technical infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order for this to be successful. So we have, in terms of IRB modifications for COVID-19 and EHR data collection, these have been approved at all of the sites, which is wonderful. Lots of work behind that. And the sites have agreed to consent patients as they are seen and to expand informed consent to enable additional data collection. IRB modifications for CMS data collection are on track to be approved by November. We have 1 site to go, really hoping to get that sorted out very soon. But that would be wonderful to have that all settled in next month. In addition, as I believe everyone here is aware, we have the consortium model that has been developed and the MEDRIC agreements are being negotiated by NAC, MEDRIC, and the sites. And this will enable the establishment of the enclave and data flow from the sites to the enclave coming through NAC. We'll talk more about that soon. So I also wanted to mention that discussions are underway with NIGADS, and I'm showing this figure again here because we're exploring a number of different options. So right now, NIGADS sends ADRC's GWAS data to NAC, and NAC sends this data to individual sites just for their participants. Okay, that's how it's currently set up. So the challenge with this new platform, right, in terms of governance, is that we want to be able to combine data from the 3 sites and make it accessible to all the sites for research. So we're interested in adding sequencing data as well. So it adds another layer of complication to the governance. So we have just initiated discussions with Lisanne on this and how we might approach this, and still have more conversations to come. But we're considering 2 primary options at this point. And so one option is that we're going to put a data transfer agreement in place with each of the sites. So sites would need to specify that they're okay with GWAS and sequencing data going to NAC, then being transferred to the MEDRIC enclaves. We're talking about it going like this, from here to here, and then to the MEDRIC enclave, where it would be used for research by all of the sites, just those 3 sites to start off with. In addition, the second option that we're considering is that NAC and the 3 sites would simultaneously, in parallel, submit data access requests to NIGADS. Then NIGADS could extract that data from the 3 centers and send it to the MEDRIC enclave, where all of the sites and NAC would have access to it for research. So there are some really important considerations that we're keeping in mind as we decide how to move forward with the best way to do this. One is, what approach is going to be scalable for the full ADRC program. That's very important, right? We know we have a pretty small N with the study so far. We want to increase that N as much as we can, and we need to be able to scale it to the all the ADRCs in order to be able to do that. So in addition, we want to be thinking about what approach is going to be scalable to other studies, right? So combining this EHR, claims, genetic, and NAC phenotypic data is going to enable all sorts of impactful research investigations, not just the COVID one, right? So we want to be able to have this, we don't have to put agreements in place for every individual study if we can avoid it. So we're also taking into account the admin and legal burdens of these approaches. So those are all really important considerations that we're thinking about as we explore how to move forward with this. So in addition, we are making good progress in developing a clinical EHR workflow. So this is for the integration of clinical and phenotypic data with informed consent. So the informatics and clinical leads have been very engaged at each of the sites in this process, which has been wonderful. So from Washington University, we have Carlos, of course, Krista, and Albert Lay. From Indiana, we have Andrew Sakin, Sophia Wong, and Sue Gao. And then from Columbia, this is being spearheaded by Jamie Noble, as well as Karthik Natarajan. So a couple other things about the EHR specification and an extraction process that are currently in development. So as I mentioned, this has been a collaboration between the clinicians and informatic leads at each of the sites. This spec is really tailored for ADRD clinicians and researchers. This is on track to finalize by the end of the month. And this data, as I mentioned before, will be integrated within the Flywheel platform. The OMOP data model was selected for this work, in line with other national efforts. So a couple points here on additional points on the clinical workflow here. So this is all being developed, of course, in anticipation of this, the MEDRIC enclave being implemented. So MEDRIC provides access to CMS claims data using a cloud-centric computing platform that NAC would basically manage on behalf of the whole ADRC program, initially for these 3 sites. So this is a secure enclave for integration analysis of NAC, NIGADs, and EHR data with Medicare claims data. So a bit of an update here on the COVID-19 data collection. So now NAC has now received 5,000 COVID V1 forms. As I mentioned, the V2 form was released to all of the sites in July and is actively being used. And that was done through a REDCap instrument that was approved by the clinical task force before being deployed, of course, the ADRCs. The COVID form content has been optimized, and we are not able to collect that V2 data yet. We will be able to do that once we have Flywheel fully up and running, but sites are actively collecting it. In addition, collection using the V1 form has continued, and so we have 5,000 forms so far for that. What I'm showing over here in this figure, and this was included in the report that we shared with you, Marilyn, is just some preliminary data. And essentially, this is all self-reported from these participants. And what we see is that that there are participants that were positive for COVID have self-reported changes in memory. So an increase in self-reported changes in memory, while that was not self-reported for depression, anxiety, behavior. So this is in line with what's been seen in other studies. Very preliminary data, nothing we would include for prime time, but wanted to just show kind of what we're seeing so far. So we've also been working very hard with the ADRCs to define the cohort for potential pilot study as we work to develop that. And so the observational study will be used to test the data linkages that we're building as part of this infrastructure that I outlined for you. And we're targeting to launch this in September, that should say October 2022. We have here the projected cohort size for just those 3 ADRCs. And that is from July 2022 to July 31, 2024. So that is the predicted cohort size. So I want everyone to just take a look at this because it is very small. And this is something that we're really eager to build on, and the real impact is going to come from scaling this to the full ADRC program. So that, of course, is our goal, is to scale this. And one of the things that we are making great progress on through this supplement is developing standard operating procedures to help other sites be able to facilitate the governance and data linkage processes, right? So we've learned a lot. This is really hard work, building these connections, both in terms of the technical work that needs to happen and in terms of the governance work that needs to happen. So it's something we've learned from what's worked and hasn't worked with these 3 sites. That's really a big part of what this pilot has been about. And we're developing some best practices that we can hopefully use in the future to help streamline the onboarding process for the rest of the ADRC program. So I want to talk a little bit about the unique value of the NAC cohort. So this is a really powerful data set. So this includes rich, historical, longitudinal, neurocognitive data from populations that are at high risk of development of long COVID. So we have more than 16,000 active participants that are currently part of the NAC database, and that number is increasing all the time. This includes older adults, of course, who were cognitively normal prior to the infection, and those that had pre-existing dementia. So one of the really unique things about our data set is that it includes this really rich, right, historical neurocognitive data that was collected prior to infection. So we're going to talk in a little bit about potential connections to other studies, like Recover and others. But what's really unique about our data set and powerful about our data set is that it has that data prior to infection. In addition, we have the infrastructure in place to continue to track their neurocognitive status post-infection. So another thing is that this is really going to enable further testing and refinement of predictive long COVID algorithms. So this includes one recently published by N3C, whose data model is aligned with ours. And if we're to expand this to the full ADRC program, this would create one of the largest and most comprehensive longitudinal data sets in the world for an age group at high risk for COVID-19 infection. So as I mentioned, this platform is only going to get more powerful as NAC works to integrate these additional data streams for ADRC participants and connect those to NAC IDs. And as I noted before, that includes standard MRI and PET imaging data, which would be very valuable to be able to compare alongside the neurocognitive data. Any questions about this before I go to the next slide? Okay. Another important point here is that this really builds on NIH's and NIA's investments in NAC, of course, in NIGADS, in the ADRC program. In addition, this work that we're doing is going to help promote MEDRIC, which is an NIA-funded partner, as the go-to secure computer enclave for combining and analyzing the data collected through this new consortium model for the ADRC community. So if the pilot is expanded to the full ADRC program, it will also help complement other NIH-funded COVID studies, such as some of the ones I've already mentioned, so N3C, Recover, and create some promising opportunities for collaboration. I want to just talk a little bit more about Recover. And I know, Marilyn, this is something that we had sent you some additional information on. This and we're just starting to think about. We still have a lot to learn at NAC about Recover. And are eager to connect with the Recover team to think through some of these ideas. And I know you had a meeting, Marilyn, you were going to report back on, eager to hear what you learned. But these are some initial thoughts. So we're interested in collaborating with them, essentially, to really help better identify older people with ADRD that either have long COVID or are at risk for long COVID, and who may be eligible to participate in clinical trials for promising new treatments, which, of course, is what Recover is trying to do. So one of the study approaches that we've started to brainstorm, it would be a parallel sort of approach. So if NAC were able to expand this data set, this platform we're building to the full ADRC program, we could look for findings and then test those with a larger Recover data set. As I mentioned, we could leverage unique features of the NAC database, that repository, in order to do that, like the fact that we have all of this extremely rich neurocognitive data from prior to infection. We could also look at connecting the data sets to merge data from participants that have been maybe participating in both the ADRC consortium studies and Recover. The NAC COVID pilot may create linkages, options between MEDRIC and Recover. And also, we're very open to sharing NAC data with Recover. So NAC releases data to any researcher who requests the data for free via our existing processes, given that they sign our DUA. So we do have some questions, so we could also potentially spend some time on that today. Marilyn, if you have some more information on this. One is that we're really interested, we know many other longitudinal studies have been collecting this rich phenotypic data from participants. A few are listed here, like Framingham, MESA. So how are these other established studies collaborating with Recover currently? We would like to learn from other models and see whether we might be able to structure a similar type of collaboration. So I don't know if you have more to weigh in on that now, Marilyn, or if you want to hold off till later, but that is a question that we still sort of have outstanding.
Well, I think the first place to start is with Gabriel, because that's self-starting. I mean, that collaboration is global, which is a caveat for you. But I mean, he put in an application and it's in for peer review. I think it has reasonable chances of getting funded if we ever get money. But it wouldn't be until later on in the year, I think, based on what the continuing resolution is doing right now. So I think that the Recover question right now from the AD genetic standpoint is best represented by what Gabriel is doing. And I don't know, Carlos, what you're doing now.
Yeah, so we are continue collecting information, and we are analyzing the data that was generated with a supplement. So that's ongoing. We don't have any additional project ongoing at this moment.
So I think you want to build that as your infrastructure scaffolding. I'll wait till the end of the presentation to give you the other things that I think are going on.
Okay. Sean, did you want to talk about the second question?
I guess my problem is I don't know enough about Recover. I think we're still sort of in a fact gathering mode. I know there's a site here at my university at UW that's collecting Recover data, and I haven't been that involved with it. So I think that I think one of the things that I'm looking for from this group is to understand a little bit better how we may be able to collaborate around data better with them as we go into potential conversations with folks that are involved with it.
So again, I'll wait till the end till I see everything, but I think that an avenue is being opened up for you.
Great.
All right, look forward to hearing about that. Thanks, Marilyn. So I'm about to share some questions that were included as part of our report, Marilyn, that we shared with you. And these were brainstormed with a number of folks on the team, including from NAC, including from our ADRC collaborators. Carlos helped develop a number of these. And so, really this governance and data linkage infrastructure that we're establishing right through this project, the hope is that this will enable impactful future investigations. So, and hopefully R01's being submitted and additional work happening, et cetera. So we are eager to support that at NAC. So some of these potential areas, and we really put these on here mainly to help spur discussion and thinking about some of these, if that's of interest to folks today. And Bud's going to help weigh in on some of these also, but so I'm just going to go through and walk through them. So one of the questions that would be interesting potential future study is to really compare the trajectories of cognitive domains. So using ATN, neuroimaging, other biomarkers, both with people with ADRD and without a history of long COVID and with a history of COVID, and to be able to look at those trajectories. Another is that we'd like to identify genetic and other biomarkers that are associated with the risk of dementia and cognitive complaints after COVID-19 infection. We'd like to determine race-specific genetic variants that are associated with COVID-19 infection and long COVID in AD and ADRC populations. And we'd like to identify risk and protective genetic variants that are associated with cognition performance after COVID-19 infection. So there's some overlap in some of these, but these are some of the questions that are, examples of future studies could be launched around. So curious for folks' thoughts on this. We also have a couple other slides of questions, but maybe we could start with these 4 and see what thoughts folks have.
I see Tom Nusky has just joined. Tom, do you want to weigh in on long COVID and what things you think are viable from your side? And because we're trying to figure out what to do with this consortium right now. Of course, you're muted. Or not there.
I
Okay.
see Sophia joined too.
Yeah. Okay.
Carlos, do you have thoughts on these questions? I can go through, we can go through all of them and come back. as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, these are some of the potential questions, but I think those are still highly relevant. There are more and more papers published about long COVID and brain fog of neuronal damage and so on. So I think these are relevant. I think these are quite broad. So it covers most of the things. I mean, identify genetic and other, imaging. I think there are going to be a lot of imaging changes in people with COVID, and we don't know how that is going to affect over time. We know that COVID changed blood AD biomarkers levels. So we don't know if those levels like NFL, GFP go back to normal or when they're going to normal. But all the analysis that has been done now are going to be confounded by COVID-19 infections. So even just for that, I think is relevant. And these are some of the potential questions.
Bud, did you want to weigh in on any of these?
I think kind of from my point of view, the basis behind a lot of that stuff is being able to look at changes as we stratify within the pathologic basis of disease, as well as maybe on a separate axis of the syndromic expression of the disease. So looking at the progression of dementia within different, say, amyloid positivity as a biomarker in the presence of COVID might be different from syndromic progression, cognitive change in people who have some other have Lewy bodies, for instance. So thinking about those kinds of things together, the biologic underpinnings of an ADRD, as well as the syndromic progression or the syndromic onset of the disease, I think is consistent with what the current understanding of this whole process is. And as we can link both, say, genetic variants and COVID-19 to those things individually, or this say the syndromic progression within the strata of biologic definition of disease, then we'll have a really much clearer idea of how COVID's affecting both the biologic progression of disease and the symptomatic or syndromic progression toward dementia or severity of dementia.
Yeah. I want to go on to the next set of questions too. And actually, I'm glad, Sophia, that you're on as well, because some of these are ones that you had weighed in on also.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in clinic.
So
A little in and out here, but absolutely, go ahead.
So some other questions that might be interesting to develop future studies around would be to identify genomic indicators that are associated with COVID-19 infection and underlying ADRD syndromes. We're also interested in determining the impact of COVID-19 infection on established CSF, plasma, and imaging biomarkers, and also potentially modifying biomarker thresholds depending on COVID-19 infection time. We're interested in identifying genetic factors that contribute to risks for clinically derived outcomes from EHR or CMS data sets, as well as looking at predictors of polygenic risk or poor outcomes in Alzheimer's disease with and without a history of COVID-19 infection. I'm going to actually read through the next list, the last four as well. We're also, other interesting areas would be identifying comorbid risk factors and protective phenotypes around medical history. So we're able to identify early risk factors that are associated with ADRD and COVID-19, doing a comparison of EHR and this kind of rich cognitive assessment data that we have that were developed for research and compared to like multi-site EHR, neuropsychological testing for impairment, investigating the long-term effects of COVID on cognitive impairment. This is sort of repetitive, sorry. And then looking at the relationship between healthcare access and outcomes in COVID-19, and that should say ADRD. So these are some of the areas that are of, some really promising studies could be developed around. So curious for thoughts. So you might have missed the first list, Sophia, but these are some of the areas that you would have seen in this report that we put together. But I'd love to hear additional thoughts. Maybe we could even start here because I think there's some social determinants factors here that would be really interesting to look at as well.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, this is a really nice list of questions that all of you have come together to put. So, sort of weighing in clinically where I'm at today. Sorry, I'm getting a message because I'm in clinic, but I think really, we have ATN and I think that's great, but I think X is going to be really important. I'm able to do amyloid imaging clinically, so I have some sense. And we're seeing a really wide range of trajectories. Now, some people actually, they may not remember because they had memory problems. They actually tried to start their dementia workup before COVID, and then they got COVID and they eventually came back and they're amyloid positive. Now, I don't think they probably became amyloid positive within the space of a year at 70 something. Probably already amyloid positive, and I did their history, it's MCI, and maybe they progressed because of time over a year, but they could have been tipped over by COVID. And then there's other cases in which, it's very fascinating. These people undergo full neuropsychological testing, completely clean, but then their neuroimaging biomarkers are abnormal. And because it's clinic, we don't do all the other stuff. But you start to collect data and it's like, interesting, the biomarkers are abnormal, the cognitive testing isn't. And then, so I think that's trajectory number 2. And then trajectory number 3. So those are people, by the way, who are mild to moderate. So that is they have mild symptoms, moderate, or maybe hospitalized for a couple of days. And then there's trajectory number 3, the people who are severely ill, right? People who got critically ill, people have been, slammed down in a lot of different ways from a cognitive standpoint. Maybe amyloid positive, maybe not, but vascular is definitely a huge driver there, right? They're vasculopathic, which put them at risk for COVID, severe COVID, and that's not going to go away. So I think this is really nice that we've started to do that. And if I were just to add one thing, I think having an X or something, because I think a lot of people are not going to fall into somewhere clean. And there's going to be people in which we do these detailed cognitive assessments and we're not going to find anything, but their neuroimaging biomarkers are going to be abnormal. And I'm going to bet like 3 or 4 years, or even like a year or 2 later, something will hit. Because this is just my gut and I could be completely wrong, but I think this is really nice, well detailed. It's going to help us really think through the complexity of long COVID, which is really a heterogeneous concept that we've just decided to call one thing to make our lives easier, but really won't be one thing for sure.
Sophia, I think there's some data supporting your gut feeling actually, because there are papers coming out now showing that onset of dementia and Alzheimer's is looking to be sped, having been sped by a COVID infection. So, for example, right? So I think I totally agree.
Yeah, they're going to have some people that are amyloid positive. Again, this kind of pushed them over. Can it convert someone who's negative to positive? Well, maybe. But there's some people who are still negative, but there's hippocampal atrophy, there's white matter. They have a lot of subjective cognitive complaints, but their testing comes back normal. But then eventually, like you retest them 6 to 1 month later as their cognition complaints get worse. And so I think, yeah, I think that's a great point, Carrie. I think it's nice that we're doing these deep characterizations. And I think that's worth emphasizing, because we're going to find something wrong, but I think we're going to find a lot of things wrong in a lot of different ways, unfortunately. So it's not going to be an easy problem to solve, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I think
whatever it's worth.
the ATN characterization is kind of a placeholder for basically all biological markers, including small vessel disease and white matter hyperintensities and so on. And and soon we'll have probably markers for Lewy bodies as well. So thinking of that in that regard, as we get markers for or indicators of biologic disease, we can relate those to how COVID affects the progression to onset or progression of symptoms, and in all of those different strata, and and potentially see how those things interact if we have enough sample size in the different groups. But it's kind of an open ball game at this point, because we don't have all those other biomarkers, if you want, to characterize all of the things that go into ADRD. But I think they're coming. We'll just have to keep that in mind. So we will eventually have TDP or alpha synuclein or whatever it might be, as in addition to all the vascular things that we can measure already in imaging. So
Yeah.
but we're set to look at that as long as we're collecting things.
And I mean, the key for us, right, is that, and I'd love to hear more thoughts from you, Marilyn, on what you've learned in the pathways you mentioned. But we want to expand this, right, to all of the sites. And there's all sorts of really, really important reasons to do that, in part because of the unique value of the NAC cohort. And we're really interested in partnering with ADRC researchers to explore some of these potential future studies. So that is something that we are here to support at NAC and help enable. And we want it to be, led by researchers at ADRCs. So I'll end with that. Thank you guys. We can have some more discussion.